Have you ever looked at the person you've built your life with and wondered if they were hiding something? For 20 years, I thought I had it all: a loving wife, two amazing kids, and a stable life. But one day, a single stranger at my birthday party set off a chain of events that changed everything. What started as a feeling, a flicker of doubt, unraveled into a shocking discovery that left me questioning everything I believed in. How did I miss the signs? And what do you do when the person you trust most has the power to shatter your world? Stay with me as I share the story of betrayal, resilience, and an incredible journey of personal growth. I'll never forget the aroma of sizzling meat on the grill, the chatter of voices filling the air, and the sun casting golden hues over the backyard. It was my birthday, a milestone I had every intention of celebrating big this year. The churrasco had been my idea, of course. Something about the fire and the smoke always brought me satisfaction, a chance to showcase my culinary skills. Family, friends, and even neighbors had gathered, turning the day into a mix of laughter and chaos, just the way I liked it. Amelia, my wife of 20 years, had helped with the details, although lately her enthusiasm felt less like excitement and more like obligation. From the crackling of the grill to the clinking of glasses, every detail had my stamp of intention. I took pride in making sure everyone felt welcomed, especially my kids, Alvin and Lou, who were always a source of joy. Alvin's off to college soon, and Lou, my baby girl, has her first real job lined up. Between my bursts of pride for them, I was constantly pulled into conversations, questions about the seasoning, the side dishes, the secret sauce. Everyone swore was magical. Little did they know that every brush of marinade on the meat was my way of pouring my heart into this gathering. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. The grill hissed with a rhythm only I seemed to understand, and the guests moved between bites and laughter. Amelia, though, stood out. She was radiant, her presence always magnetic, but something about her demeanor felt different. It wasn't just her smile, softer yet somehow distant. It was the way her eyes scanned the crowd like she was searching for something, or someone. For a moment, I brushed it off, focusing on the laughter of Alvin, the warm glow of satisfaction that came with being surrounded by loved ones. As the sun dipped below the horizon and fairy lights took over, my exhaustion crept in, but I didn't mind. The churrasco was a success. The guests were happy, the food devoured. And yet, that nagging feeling wouldn't let go. Amelia seemed distracted, slipping away from the crowd more often than usual. A neighbor approached her, then another unfamiliar face, a man. They exchanged pleasantries, or so it seemed. Their interaction was brief, nothing overt, but something about it triggered a quiet curiosity in me. For the first time that night, I wasn't fully present. The party wound down, leaving me surrounded by empty plates and fond memories of laughter. The night should have felt perfect, a day to be etched in my heart, yet something felt off. Amelia was always the picture of composure, but tonight, her silence lingered too long. Her absence from my side felt deliberate. As I tidied up, her laughter echoed faintly from the other side of the house, blending with a stranger's voice. It was a fleeting sound, but it planted a seed of doubt, one that would only grow. Amelia and I had built 2 decades of life together, years filled with laughter, arguments, triumphs, and compromises. Our relationship had always been like a dance, sometimes in perfect harmony, other times stepping on each other's toes. Lately, though, the rhythm felt broken. Her once vibrant energy seemed dulled, like a flame struggling against a draft. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when her smile alone could light up my worst days. But since she started working, a distance had crept in, a subtle shift in her intentions that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Our children, Alvin and Lou, were the glue holding us together, or at least that's how it felt. Alvin, my eldest, was preparing to leave for university, a bittersweet milestone that filled me with pride and longing. Lou, ever the dreamer, was stepping into adulthood with her first job. Watching them grow brought me immense satisfaction, but it also highlighted how much had changed between their mother and me. Conversations with Amelia had grown shallow, focused on schedules and logistics. The easy intimacy we once shared seemed to have vanished, replaced by polite exchanges and distracted nods. I couldn't help but wonder if it was me. Had I become too predictable, too set in my ways? After all, I'd always been the steady one, while Amelia had a restless spark. She'd mentioned wanting more freedom, more excitement, but I thought we'd find that together. Now I wasn't so sure. Her late nights, her growing circle of friends, the way she carried herself with a newfound confidence. It was both alluring and unsettling. I wanted to believe she was just evolving, finding satisfaction in her own journey. But a part of me feared I was no longer part of the picture she was painting. Alvin and Lou, oblivious to my turmoil, continued to be my anchors. Alvin, with his ambitious plans, reminded me of my younger self, full of dreams and determination. Lou's kindness and sharp wit were a mirror of her mother in the early days. They deserved stability, a family they could look to with pride. And yet, I couldn't ignore the cracks forming beneath the surface. Amelia's intentions seemed elsewhere, and the more I tried to reach her, the more she slipped through my fingers. It was like grasping at smoke, something tangible yet impossible to hold. One evening, as Lou laughed at something Alvin said, I caught Amelia watching them with a wistful smile. For a brief moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with, the one who made every mundane moment feel extraordinary. But then her gaze shifted, distant once again. I knew we needed to talk, to bridge the growing gap, but I wasn't sure how to start. Something told me she already had one foot out the door, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the man from the party was somehow tied to this change. It started with little things, subtle shifts in Amelia's routine that, at first, I dismissed as harmless. She'd stay out later than usual, citing work events or catch-ups with friends. Her phone, once carelessly left on counters and tables, was now glued to her hand, its screen always tilted away. I wanted to believe her intentions were innocent, but each passing day chipped away at that belief. It wasn't jealousy, I told myself. It was curiosity, or maybe denial, trying to make sense of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was piecing together. Then there was the man. He'd appeared at the Churrasco uninvited, blending in like he belonged. Amelia introduced him casually, her voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite place. Too polite, too familiar. He stayed just long enough to make me uneasy, leaving with a handshake that lingered a second too long. When I asked who he was, she brushed it off with a dismissive laugh. Just a colleague, she said. The words were simple, but the way she avoided my gaze left me questioning her sincerity. I wondered if he was the missing piece to this strange new side of her. Her behavior at home shifted too. Amelia was always busy now, constantly finding excuses to step out or stay locked away in her room. She'd started wearing perfumes I hadn't seen before, her wardrobe suddenly full of outfits that didn't quite match her usual style. If I pointed it out, she'd wave me off with a smile, saying she just wanted to try something new. It wasn't like her to be so evasive, and her newfound independence felt less like growth and more like a deliberate wall between us. The satisfaction I used to feel in her presence was now replaced with unease. One night, as she got ready to leave for yet another meeting, I found myself staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked beautiful, more radiant than I'd seen her in years. But it wasn't for me, was it? Her movements, her energy, it was all for someone else. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't want to hear another excuse. Instead, I waited until she left and scrolled through the contacts in her phone. Most of them were familiar, but one number stood out. A name I didn't recognize, saved without any context. My stomach twisted, and for the first time, I felt truly lost. The man from the Churrasco kept resurfacing in my mind, his presence like a shadow over everything. He wasn't just a colleague. I was sure of it. Amelia's laugh around him had been lighter, her smile wider. It was a version of her I hadn't seen in years. And as much as I wanted to confront her, something held me back. A small, desperate hope that I was wrong. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a phase. Something was unraveling, and I had no idea how to stop it. The morning Amelia left was like any other, until it wasn't. She'd packed a bag without saying a word and walked out the door, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed on my chest. No note, no explanation, just the faint echo of her footsteps fading away. I tried calling her, texting her, but the responses were either brief or non-existent. Her sudden departure was a storm I hadn't seen coming, though in hindsight, the signs were all there. It wasn't just her absence that stung. It was the unanswered questions swirling in its wake. Desperation drove me to take measures I never thought I would. Canceling her credit cards wasn't just about control. It was about forcing an explanation. If she wouldn't talk to me, I'd find another way to get answers. When she called to complain, her voice was colder than I'd expected. She accused me of overreacting, but the fact she didn't return home spoke volumes. My intentions weren't to punish her, but to understand. How could 20 years of marriage dissolve so quietly, without even a proper fight? That's when I reached out to an old friend, someone who knew how to dig deeper than I ever could. Within days, he came back with the truth, a truth I wasn't ready for. Amelia had been seeing someone, and not just anyone. It was the man from the Churrasco, the stranger who'd laughed a little too easily in our backyard. My heart sank as my friend handed me photos, text logs, evidence that painted a picture I didn't want to see. There was no denying it now. The woman I'd shared my life with had betrayed me. The revelation was a strange mix of pain and clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the secrecy, the distant smiles. But knowing didn't bring the satisfaction I'd hoped for. Instead, it left a hollow ache, a gnawing sense of failure. I couldn't stop replaying the Churrasco in my mind, dissecting every moment, every glance between them. Had everyone noticed but me? Or had I chosen not to see it? The worst part was the realization that Amelia had made a choice that didn't include me. Even as anger bubbled beneath the surface, sadness overshadowed it. This was the woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, my partner through decades of highs and lows. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I wasn't ready for what those answers might reveal. Instead, I sat in the quiet of our empty house, the echoes of her laughter haunting every corner, and tried to piece together what came next. When I finally saw Amelia again, it wasn't at home, and it wasn't planned. I found her at a cafe, sitting across from him. They were close, too close, their hushed conversation full of smiles and stolen glances. My breath caught, anger surging like a tidal wave. I wanted to storm in, flip the table, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, watching as the reality of her betrayal played out in front of me. There was no denying it now. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and devastation. That night I called her. My voice shook as I demanded an explanation, but she didn't deny anything. Instead, she cried, a sound that only fueled my rage. She said she was confused, that she never intended to hurt me. The word intention felt like a slap. What did that even mean? She chose him, chose this, and now she was sorry? It was too much to process. I hung up, the sound of her sobs lingering in my ears. It wasn't regret I wanted from her. It was honesty. In my anger, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to the man's wife. Her name was Clara, and when I told her who I was and what I'd discovered, her reaction was eerily calm. She'd suspected for a while, she said, but hearing it confirmed was like ripping off a Band-Aid. We talked for hours, swapping stories, piecing together the timeline of their affair. It was strange, finding solace in a stranger, but Clara understood my pain in a way no one else could. When the confrontation finally happened, it wasn't as explosive as I'd imagined. I met Amelia at home, the house cold and silent around us. I laid everything out, the photos, the messages, the lies. She didn't try to deny it, but her tears and apologies felt hollow. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. For the first time in 20 years, I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. She begged for another chance, her words desperate, but the damage was done. As I drove away that night, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but so was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Amelia's choices had shattered our marriage, but they'd also forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. I wasn't the same man I'd been when we first fell in love, and maybe that was okay. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of who I was. Now, it was time to find that man again. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. The hardest part was making the decision to let go of what we'd built. I walked into the lawyer's office with a mix of nerves and resolve, the papers in my hand feeling heavier than they should. Amelia didn't contest much. She cried during the mediation, pleading for a second chance, but I couldn't shake the betrayal. Her intentions, no matter how regretful now, had carved a wound too deep to ignore. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was closure. The process was messy, as divorces often are. Dividing 20 years of life felt like dismantling a house brick by brick. The financial toll was significant, but the emotional weight was worse. Memories seeped into everything. The couch where we'd watched countless movies, the dining table that bore witness to family milestones. Amelia tried to hold on to the house, but I fought for it, not out of spite, but because it was home. In the end, we compromised, selling it and splitting the proceeds. The loss felt like another goodbye. Alvin and Lou took the news better than I expected, though the sadness in their eyes was unmistakable. Alvin, ever the pragmatist, told me he understood, even if it hurt. Lou was quieter, her questions tinged with disbelief. "Why couldn't you fix it?" she asked one evening, and I had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow. I tried to reassure them that this didn't change how much we loved them, but I knew it wasn't enough. They were caught in the crossfire of something they didn't deserve. The divorce was finalized a week before the local elections, a detail that would have been insignificant if not for the timing. The man who had shattered my life stood on the ballot, smiling in campaign photos as if he hadn't turned my world upside down. His hypocrisy was galling, and part of me wanted to expose him, but I held back, knowing it wouldn't bring the satisfaction I craved. Amelia's betrayal had already consumed enough of my energy. I refused to let it control my future. As I signed the final documents, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Losing Amelia was like losing a part of myself, but it was also a chance to start over. For the first time in years, I could focus on what I wanted, what I needed. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer suffocating. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized I was free, not just from the marriage, but from the doubt and insecurity that had defined it for far too long. The days after the divorce felt like stepping into uncharted territory. For the first time in years, the house was quiet, almost peaceful. I started small, rearranging furniture, clearing out old belongings, reclaiming the space as my own. It was satisfying in a way I didn't expect, like shedding a heavy coat after a long winter. Each step forward felt lighter, though the scars from the betrayal still lingered. I couldn't help but think about the man Amelia chose, his name still a bitter taste in my mouth. But focusing on him wouldn't heal me. I had to focus on myself. One of the first major changes I considered was moving. The idea of starting fresh in a new region, away from the memories tied to every corner of this place, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I started researching towns where no one knew me or my story. The thought of walking into a cafe and being just another face in the crowd felt like freedom. I kept it quiet, though. Only Lou and Alvin knew, and even they seemed unsure how to feel about it. But for once, my decisions were about me, not anyone else. Friends and family became my lifeline during this period. My best friend, Daniel, kept me grounded with his humor and blunt advice, while my sister offered a constant stream of encouragement. Lou and Alvin checked in often, their calls a reminder of the satisfaction I still found in being their father. I leaned on them more than I ever thought I would, and in doing so, I realized how much I'd neglected my own support system over the years. Building those bridges back became a new priority. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about Amelia and him, snippets from mutual acquaintances who didn't know better than to share. She'd moved on, or so it seemed, but I couldn't help but notice the cracks in their picture-perfect life. His campaign didn't go as planned. Rumors swirled about his integrity. It was ironic, watching him stumble under the weight of his own hypocrisy. I didn't revel in his struggles, but I couldn't ignore the satisfaction of seeing the truth catch up to him. It felt like a reminder that some wounds heal themselves in time. As I sat on my porch one evening, the sunset casting warm colors over the horizon, I reflected on everything that had happened. I wasn't the man I was a year ago, nor did I want to be. The betrayal had broken me, yes, but it also forced me to rebuild. I was still learning, still healing, but the future didn't feel so daunting anymore. I didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to take the first step.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.